The rain had already turned the Portland streets glossy by the time Ethan Miller pulled into the driveway. His headlights sliced through the wet darkness, catching the trembling reflections of maple leaves scattered across the pavement. It was nearly midnight. He had driven straight from the airport after a 3-day conference in Denver, exhausted and craving nothing more than a hot shower and the familiar warmth of home. But the moment he stepped through the front door, a thin unease curled through him. The house felt different. Too quiet. Too still. As if someone had exhaled and never breathed again. Claire always left a lamp glowing in the living room whenever he traveled. Tonight it was off. Ethan set his suitcase down carefully and listened. The refrigerator hummed softly. A floorboard settled upstairs. Somewhere in the distance, water ran briefly through the pipes before stopping again. "Claire," he called gently. No answer. He moved farther into the house and noticed the smell first. Not Claire's lavender lotion. Not her perfume. Something sharper. Musky. Unfamiliar. A man's cologne lingering faintly in the hallway. His chest tightened, though he immediately pushed the thought away. Travel always made him restless. Jet lag warped the senses. That had to be it. Then Claire appeared at the top of the stairs. Her damp hair was tied hastily into a loose knot. She wore an oversized sweater Ethan didn't recognize. Her eyes widened the moment she saw him. Not with excitement. With surprise. "Ethan," she breathed. "You're early." He forced a small smile. "Got an earlier flight. Thought I'd surprise you." She swallowed hard. "You did." Something in her voice felt wrong. Thin. Careful. Measured. He knew that tone. "Everything okay?" She nodded too quickly. "Yeah. Just a long day. Give me a minute, okay?" Before he could respond, she disappeared back toward the bathroom and shut the door. Seconds later, the water started running again. Too quickly. As if she needed noise more than a shower. Ethan stood silently at the foot of the stairs. Marriage wasn't supposed to feel like detective work. Claire had always been private when stressed. He had learned long ago to give her space. Still, the cologne. He walked into the living room and noticed another detail. The throw blanket Claire always folded perfectly after watching television was tossed carelessly across the couch. Not like her. Then a phone buzzed. Claire's phone lit up on the kitchen counter, screen facing upward. A rarity. A message preview flashed before fading. Lucas. Ethan froze. Lucas Bennett. A coworker Claire talked about often. Creative. Ambitious. Funny. The rising star at her marketing firm. The phone buzzed again. Lucas. Did he? Claire suddenly appeared at the staircase landing. Ethan instinctively stepped away from the counter, but she had already noticed where he'd been looking. "Please don't read anything," she said quickly. "It's work stuff." "I didn't read it." But the name stayed in his mind. Lucas. Claire offered him a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Let's not do this tonight. You're tired." She leaned forward and kissed him softly. A kiss that felt more distracting than affectionate. "Let me clean up a little," she whispered. "From what?" She froze. Only for a second. But Ethan saw the panic flicker across her face before she recovered. "From the shower," she said quickly. He nodded slowly. But after nearly 8 years of marriage, Ethan knew the difference between embarrassment and fear. Outside, the rain intensified against the windows. And somewhere deep inside him something shifted. An awareness. The feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff he hadn't realized he'd been approaching. As Claire tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear, Ethan noticed her hand trembling. Not from cold. From nerves. "I missed you," he said quietly. Her eyes glistened with something heavier than warmth. "I missed you too." A half-truth wrapped in sadness. Ethan moved upstairs slowly while Claire remained frozen near the staircase, fingers clutching the railing. He still didn't know the truth. Not fully. But he could feel it waiting beneath the surface. The house wasn't silent because it was empty. It was silent because something had happened inside it. And for the first time, Ethan was finally ready to see it. In the beginning, their marriage had felt like a promise carved carefully into the world. Ethan and Claire met at 27. Young enough to still believe in luck. Old enough to recognize something real when it appeared. Back then Portland seemed warmer. Maybe because everything about their lives still glowed with possibility. They lived in a small apartment overlooking the Willamette River, where mornings smelled like coffee and rain and nights were spent talking about the future on thrift store furniture they couldn't afford to replace. Claire dreamed out loud. She wanted to lead creative campaigns that made people feel something. She wanted to build a name for herself. Ethan's dreams were quieter. A stable home. A steady marriage. A life built on honesty and calm. They balanced each other perfectly. Claire brought color. Ethan brought peace. But life in their 30s unfolded differently than either of them expected. After 4 years of marriage, Claire's career accelerated rapidly. Promotions came one after another. Longer hours. Higher pressure. Bigger expectations. The marketing world consumed her. Creative launches. Networking parties. Influencers. Photographers. People obsessed with attention and image. And Claire thrived in it. At first, Ethan admired her ambition. He cooked dinner while she worked late. Listened to her vent about office politics. Celebrated every success like it belonged to both of them. But slowly something changed. Their conversations shifted. Claire talked less about ideas and more about impressions. How many people liked a campaign? How many comments her photos received? Who complimented her outfit? Who noticed her leadership? Validation became oxygen. Meanwhile, Ethan remained grounded in quieter things. Architectural blueprints. Routine. Meaning that didn't require an audience. Without realizing it, they began living beside each other instead of with each other. Not because they stopped loving one another. Because exhaustion slowly replaced intimacy. Claire would come home still mentally connected to work, scrolling through messages while Ethan tried to talk about his day. He noticed it. The distracted nods. The delayed responses. The distance growing quietly between them. Friends noticed too. "You two seem busy lately," someone once said during a dinner party. "We're fine," Claire replied too quickly. Ethan squeezed her hand beneath the table. She squeezed back. But it felt practiced. Not natural. By their 7th year of marriage, the cracks had become impossible to ignore. Arguments rarely exploded. They dissolved. "Work is stressful," Claire would say whenever Ethan asked why she came home so late. And Ethan believed her. Or tried to. Then Lucas Bennett entered her world. Lucas was exactly the kind of man the agency admired. Sharp suits. Easy charm. Magnetic confidence. The type of person who knew how to make others feel seen. Especially women already feeling invisible inside their own lives. At first, Claire mentioned him casually. Then constantly. "Lucas really understands audience psychology. He pushes me creatively. He gets it." Ethan listened quietly every time. But eventually he noticed the light in her voice whenever she spoke his name. A brightness she no longer carried home. Then came the travel. Weekend retreats. Late-night brainstorming sessions. Out-of-town launches. Ethan spent more evenings alone at the dining table, while Claire answered texts hours later with exhausted apologies and empty heart emojis. The first real warning sign came 6 months before the night Ethan smelled cologne in the hallway. Claire began dressing differently. More carefully. More deliberately. New perfume. Bolder makeup. Outfits she never wore around him. When Ethan noticed, she smiled casually. "I want to look the part of a leader." It made sense. But the way she checked her reflection twice before leaving the house stayed with him. The drift between them wasn't dramatic. It was erosion. Slow. Steady. Almost invisible until everything underneath had already weakened. Ethan tried to save what they still had. Weekend trips. Date nights. Conversations. Even counseling. Claire always had a reason to postpone them. "The team needs me. The campaign is overwhelming. Things will calm down soon." But they never did. Because somewhere inside that world of endless attention and validation, Claire had started chasing the feeling of being wanted. And by the time Ethan finally sensed the full truth, the distance between them had already become a chasm. The shift didn't arrive with screaming. It arrived with silence. A different tone in Claire's voice. Long pauses before answering simple questions. The subtle feeling that part of her was always somewhere else. One Tuesday evening, Ethan came home early and found Claire sitting stiffly at the kitchen counter with her laptop open. When he kissed her cheek, she flinched almost imperceptibly. Not from disgust. From surprise. She closed the laptop too quickly. "Long day?" he asked. "Endless meetings," she replied. But her eyes looked restless. Like she was waiting for someone else to message her. Her phone buzzed. Claire immediately turned the screen face down. "You're not going to check it?" Ethan asked. "It can wait." That answer bothered him more than if she'd checked immediately. For years, Claire responded to work messages the second they arrived. Now she guarded her phone like it carried pieces of her she couldn't risk exposing. That night, Ethan lay awake beside her while notifications quietly glowed beneath the book covering her phone. She never stirred. Whatever she was hiding only needed hiding while she was awake. Over the following weeks, the distance deepened. Claire started leaving before sunrise. "Lucas likes brainstorming early before the office gets busy," she explained one morning. The admiration in her voice lingered long after she walked out the door. Another night, Ethan cooked her favorite meal hoping to reconnect. At 7 o'clock she called. "I'm stuck at work. Lucas needs help finishing the pitch." Ethan ate dinner alone while the food slowly went cold. And still he tried to convince himself everything was fine. Until the Saturday morning that changed everything. Claire had just stepped into the shower after yoga when her phone vibrated against the bathroom counter. Ethan wasn't snooping. He simply happened to hear it. The message preview appeared on the screen. "Lucas. Missed last night. You okay?" Ethan felt the floor go cold beneath his feet. "Missed last night." The words hollowed something inside him instantly. Moments later, Claire emerged wrapped in a towel, humming softly until she noticed the expression on his face. "You're quiet," she said. "Just tired." Then after a pause, "Did you see Lucas last night?" Her expression tightened. "We had a team dinner." "I told you that." Ethan nodded slowly. He remembered. But now the memory felt contaminated. "Why?" she asked carefully. "Did something happen?" "No. Just asking." She studied him for a moment, trying to measure how much he knew. Then she turned away. The rest of the day passed like two strangers sharing the same rooms. Ethan noticed everything after that. The new perfume. The private smiles at her phone. The extra attention to her appearance. The distant look in her eyes whenever he tried reaching her emotionally. One evening while Claire prepared for another late work session, Ethan stood quietly in the doorway. "Will Lucas be there tonight?" She froze. "Ethan, please don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I'm asking." "What are you implying?" Fear sharpened her voice. Not anger. Fear. "You've been distant," Ethan said softly. "I don't know how to reach you anymore." That's not fair. But the truth was already hanging between them. In the late nights. The hidden messages. The excitement in her voice whenever Lucas's name appeared. Ethan never raised his voice. He carried pain quietly. But by then, denial could no longer silence what his intuition already knew. The truth arrived on an ordinary Thursday. Claire had rushed out that morning, accidentally leaving her work bag near the dining table. Around noon she texted him. "Can you bring my charger later?" Red heart. The heart emoji felt mechanical. That evening, Ethan opened her bag to place the charger inside. That's when he saw the folded receipt. A hotel. His breathing stopped. For several seconds he simply stared at it without touching it. Then slowly, with trembling hands, he unfolded the paper. An upscale downtown hotel. The date matched a night Claire claimed she'd been working late on campaign revisions. But what shattered him wasn't the hotel itself. It was the name attached to the reservation. Lucas Bennett. And beneath it, additional guests checked in at 9:47 p.m. Claire Monroe. Ethan felt something inside him collapse. Then he noticed another envelope tucked deeper inside the bag. Printed emails. Screenshots. Messages. Not explicit. Worse. Intimate. Emotionally naked. "I can't stop thinking about last night. You make everything feel dangerous in the best way. Tell me you feel this too." And Claire's reply. "I shouldn't, but I do. I don't know how to stop. He trusts me, Lucas. I feel guilty and alive." Alive. That word hurt most of all. As if life with Ethan had slowly stopped mattering. The front door opened. Claire stepped inside and froze the moment she saw him sitting at the table. Her eyes moved immediately to the paper spread before him. Her face drained of color. Ethan. Her voice broke. Please let me explain. But there was nothing left to explain. The truth was already lying between them. How long? Ethan asked quietly. Claire's jaw trembled. 3 months. Was it emotional or physical? She closed her eyes. Both. The word landed heavily in the room. I made a mistake, she whispered desperately. I was stressed and lonely, Anne. No. His voice stayed calm. Too calm. You didn't make a mistake, Claire. He looked directly into her eyes. You made a choice. Tears spilled down her face. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. I didn't mean for this to happen. You planned it. The hotel. The lies. The messages. None of it happened accidentally. Claire buried her face in her hands. Lucas made me feel seen, she sobbed. I felt invisible. I felt exhausted all the time. He made me feel alive again. Ethan stared at her silently, then finally asked, And what about us? She couldn't answer, because deep down they both already knew. Their marriage had been dying long before the affair began. The affair had simply finished what distance started. Claire reached for his hand. Ethan instinctively pulled away. That small movement destroyed her more than shouting ever could. Please, she whispered. Can you forgive me? Ethan stood slowly. You want forgiveness as if this was an accident, he said quietly. Then the words that would haunt her forever. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. The days afterward blurred together. Half-packed boxes. Awkward silence. The sound of footsteps echoing through a house that no longer felt like home. Ethan didn't scream. He didn't destroy anything. One morning he simply left with a suitcase, a cardboard box of essentials, and an old framed photograph of his parents. The rest no longer felt like his life. His new apartment overlooked the river. Small. Quiet. Unfamiliar. The first night there, Ethan sat alone on the balcony drinking bitter instant coffee while city lights trembled across the water. The silence hurt, but eventually it also healed. Some nights grief arrived as anger. Other nights as numbness. He questioned everything. Was I not enough? Did I ignore the signs? Did she ever really love me? At work he became quieter. More distant. But slowly, piece by piece, the silence forced him to rebuild himself. Meanwhile, Claire remained inside the home they once shared. Only now every room felt haunted. She tried calling Ethan constantly. Most of the time he didn't answer. Lucas, the man she risked everything for, began pulling away within weeks. The excitement faded. The secrecy disappeared. Reality replaced fantasy. Eventually he admitted things had become too complicated. And just like that he was gone. That realization devastated Claire in ways she never expected. Not because she loved Lucas, but because she had destroyed her marriage for someone who was never willing to stay. At work, whispers followed her through hallways. Friends stopped inviting her out. People who once admired her confidence now looked at her differently. Every night she replayed Ethan's words. You made a choice. And with each passing week, she understood them more deeply. 3 months later, Claire finally gathered the courage to knock on Ethan's apartment door. When he opened it, he looked different. Thinner. Calmer. More grounded. The pain in his eyes had softened into quiet acceptance. And somehow that hurt her more than anger ever could. He stepped aside politely. Inside, the apartment reflected peace. Clean furniture. Books stacked neatly. Soft lighting. A life no longer built around chaos. Claire suddenly felt like a stranger intruding on it. I should have come sooner, she whispered once they sat down. Ethan waited silently. I didn't just cheat, she admitted through tears. I chose attention over loyalty. I chose validation over love. I became addicted to feeling wanted. The confession poured out of her. The lies. The guilt. The emptiness. The regret. Lucas didn't love me, she said quietly. I think deep down I always knew that. She looked at Ethan desperately. I miss you every day. I miss our life. I miss the person I used to be before I destroyed everything. Then finally, I'm asking for another chance. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. No anger. No hatred. Only clarity. Claire, he said gently. I'm not angry anymore. Hope flickered briefly across her face. But then he continued. I'm also not the same man I used to be. Her breathing trembled. I can change, she whispered. Please just let me try. Ethan exhaled slowly. I believe you regret it, he said honestly. I believe you're sorry. He paused. But forgiveness doesn't always mean rebuilding what was broken. Tears spilled down her cheeks. We were already drowning long before the affair, he continued quietly. The cheating wasn't the beginning. It was the end. Claire covered her face and sobbed. I still love you. Ethan's expression softened with sadness. I loved you too, he said. Maybe part of me always will. But I'm not going back to something that destroyed us both. And in that moment Claire finally understood. Ethan was no longer hers to lose. She had already lost him the day she chose someone else. Goodbye, Claire. Her tears fell silently onto the floor between them, the final trace of a life that no longer existed. Months later, Ethan stood alone on the Oregon coast before sunrise. Cold ocean air moved through him as waves collapsed gently against the shoreline. For the first time in years, the silence around him no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. Healing hadn't arrived dramatically. Came slowly. Making coffee without grief attached to it. Taking evening walks. Reading new books. Learning who he was without betrayal defining him. He didn't hate Claire anymore. He simply stopped carrying her choices as his burden. Meanwhile, Claire remained trapped inside the consequences of her own decisions. The house felt colder. Work felt hollow. The validation she once chased now seemed painfully meaningless. Some nights she sat alone looking through old photos of her and Ethan. Weddings. Road trips. Ordinary moments that once felt permanent. But the truth never changed. He didn't leave because she made a mistake. He left because she repeatedly made choices that told him he was no longer chosen. And eventually, Ethan chose himself instead. The story didn't end with revenge. It ended with clarity. Ethan rebuilt a life rooted in peace, honesty, and self-worth. Claire carried forward the painful understanding that love is not always stolen. Sometimes it is slowly forfeited. And under separate skies, both of them moved on. One toward healing. The other toward reckoning. Each living with the consequences of the choices they made.